And we are back. The New York legislature has passed the Equal Rights Amendment for a second consecutive session, paving the way for New Yorkers to vote on it in the November 2024 ballot. The amendment is set to transform our state's legal framework by prohibiting discrimination based on ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, and sex. Here now, the Deputy Director and Legislative Director of the League of Women Voters of New York, Erica Smitka. And Erica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, as we're on the precipice of this, talk to me about what all this means.
Absolutely. So this is really a critical moment for New Yorkers. It'll be the first time that New Yorkers in November will have the ability to guarantee our own rights and freedoms within our state constitution. Those rights and freedoms are permanently protected and not up to the whims of politicians, like we are unfortunately seeing in so many states across the country. So it's going to be a big moment. You did a great job giving a synopsis of what that amendment will mean to so many New Yorkers. We're really looking forward for voters to have that opportunity to vote in November.
Let's unpack the amendment. I gave a little bit of an intro to it, but for somebody that's looking for a little bit more depth in it, let's unpack it now. So
yeah, sure.
My fault. No, I'll let you go ahead. I thought I should have said a little bit more, but you go right ahead.
No, I'll just say that this amendment is so broad and so inclusive that it will truly have, too many impacts for me to be able to detail on on the show today. But I can give a few examples of what this might mean for New Yorkers. And essentially, what this amendment will do is it'll ensure that laws will not be able to be passed that could discriminate against New Yorkers solely based on their identity. So, for example, the New York State ERA would keep the state from passing a statewide abortion ban, or banning private insurance coverage of abortion, or prosecuting or criminalizing folks solely based on pregnancy outcomes, like a miscarriage, et cetera, et cetera. And those are just a few examples of how this amendment would protect folks within the sphere of our reproductive rights. But it gives you a good idea of just how this might affect New Yorkers in their everyday lives.
We presently have these anti-discrimination laws that are currently in place. I mean, we'll talk about, there are existing statutes out there, but talk to us about the necessity of why we need to see the ERA in New York, given the fact that we've got these discriminatory statutes.
Absolutely. So we are lucky to live in a state that has such robust state laws when it comes to discrimination, robust and expansive state laws. But that being said, these are just laws, right? And so by ensuring that these rights and freedoms are codified within our Constitution, it would protect those rights from being changed solely based on, the political whims of who may be in power at this time. So, for example, our last gubernatorial election, we saw an anti-choice politician was mere points away from winning that election and becoming governor of New York State. And so you can see how just one election can really change the tide in New York. And we've got to make sure that these rights and protections are in our Constitution so that that's not a worry or a fear for New Yorkers.
One concern that I know that comes with the ERA is that of pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. When we talk about that issue in particular, how can we really unpack that from the perspective of how is it protected, particularly for those who are pregnant and dealing with pregnancy outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this is something that we're seeing, as I said, we're seeing it more and more in states across this country, unfortunately. And it really can be, the criminalization of something like a miscarriage can be absolutely devastating to folks. So I know I noted some of these earlier, but this amendment would ensure that New York State could not pass laws such as a statewide abortion ban, or adding medically unnecessary burdens on patients or providers who might be seeking an abortion or who may have a miscarriage. Or it would not allow for New York to be able to criminalize or prosecute someone solely based on those pregnancy outcomes, like a miscarriage. So it truly, would be great. And, not only does this address reproductive health, but as you noted earlier, it pertains to so many different classes and communities of New Yorkers, and will have wide sweeping effects.
We have on our side a lot of marginalized people within the community, and that marginalized population is really concerned about the impact, the potential impact that this will have. Talk to me about that particular issue of the marginalized community and how you see this playing out.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways in which this can play out, and I guess the one thing I want to emphasize is that this is not a new law in New York State, right? We already have these really robust, as we talked about, laws against discrimination and protections for New Yorkers, but this would really just enforce, solidify those laws protecting New Yorkers within our Constitution. And so what that looks like can take many shapes and many forms. Again, I think to go back to reproductive rights and reproductive health care, we quite often see the most marginalized members of our communities who are the ones in the center of these discussions in states where folks are being criminalized for miscarriages or for getting an abortion. And so to be able to defend the rights of all New Yorkers based on the number of communities that are protected, this really would, as I said, could take many forms, but that's just one small example.
Yeah. And I think at the same time, we're talking along those lines, there's a lot of people who are concerned when it comes to the issue of civil rights and the possibility of seeing that rollback of what's going on. A lot of progress has been made down through the years. We know recently a lot of rights have been challenged and a lot of rights are really up for grabs in some way, shape, or form. Talk to me about the ERA and the rollback of civil rights.
Yeah, I want to take the words you just used, that those rights are up for grabs, and that's exactly what we're seeing happen, right? We're seeing, especially after the Dobbs decision, we're seeing that rights that are not explicitly protected in states across our country are being taken away in one way, shape, or form, and that again goes right back to all different communities within New York State. So currently our Constitution includes protections for race and religion, but as you said, this amendment would expand those protections to include ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, sex, and that list goes on. And so again, there's a lot of different ways in which this could protect folks using that civil rights lens or angle.
When I, used the word up for grabs, it was definitely intentional because I know that it really boils down to this. Who gets to the polls, who votes, who's actually going to be going out there and making a difference by pulling that, we used to say pull the lever, right? But now it's so electronic, right? But really getting to the ballot box and making their vote heard. I want to talk about this here because that's another thing about the League of Women Voters we have to talk about is advocacy. There's a lot of work that's being done to really engage people to get boots on the ground, to get out, to be able to vote, so that way these rights are not taken back or we see these potential rollbacks.
Exactly. And we know that we know broadly, based especially on a study that was done in 2022, that New Yorkers support this amendment. Almost 80% of New Yorkers would support an amendment like this that protects against discrimination. And as you said, each and every day, right? We're pounding the pavement in counties across the state to turn out educated voters and turn out voters who know that when they get to the polling booth, they've got to flip that ballot in order to vote on the New York ERA. Voters who know, exactly what they can expect to see on their ballot, make sure they get there on election day or during that early voting time period to make sure that their vote and their voice is heard. And the League is a part of a really robust coalition, the New Yorkers for Equal Rights Coalition, which is made up of hundreds of organizations working across the state to do just that, right? To educate folks on the New York Equal Rights Amendment and to activate folks to get out and vote this November.
Well, if the Equal Rights Amendment does have its way and passes through in New York State, what kind of potential ramifications are we looking at nationwide? If New York State does it, what can we see across this country?
So New York, as we've been in the past, we like to see ourselves as a leader, and that's exactly what we're hoping to do with this amendment. really lead the way on one of the most expansive amendments to a state constitution nationwide. And it's so expansive because it again includes all of those communities that are essential to making New York the state that we are. And so we're hoping that by passing this amendment, having the voters approve this amendment here in New York State, we can lead the way for other states to follow suit and pass similar amendments within their own constitutions.
And Erica, for yourself, a little bit of a more personal, how does it line up, the ERAs, I should say, what goes on in the ERA, how does it line up along with the mission and the vision of the League of Women Voters?
Yeah, the League has been fighting since 1919 to protect the rights. We started working to protect the right of women to vote, and we've continued to protect the rights not only of women, but of all New Yorkers and all folks in the United States. We're a nationwide organization. So this amendment really goes back to the heart of who we are and what we do. It's protecting those rights and those freedoms for everybody, and for all New Yorkers, and now for all voters. So this definitely, pulls at the heartstrings of the League, and we've got a lot of members on the ground across the state who are really actively engaged in making sure this amendment gets passed in November.
This seems like a common sense, no-brainer thing to happen, right? But yet and still we understand that there's a lot of possibility that it won't. I guess the question would be, from my perspective, is why? What are we seeing out there that maybe you want to speak to?
Sure. So we're seeing a sect of it's really a small sect of an anti-choice minority group of folks that are looking to push back on this amendment, and that would like to see this amendment off the ballot in November. And that's just what it is. It really is just a minority of folks here in New York State who want to ensure that New Yorkers don't solidify their rights and access to freedom of protection from discrimination. And this is not an isolated incident, right? We've seen similar groups in other states across the country launch similar attacks against very similar amendments. And so, we don't have any fears that this amendment won't be successful in November, but that opposition is there. And if anything, I think it makes at least folks at the League fight even harder.
Well, I think when we talk about, if we're really being honest, when we talk about presidential elections, we really don't have to worry too much because we do understand that people are going to come out. But on the years when you don't have presidential elections and you're having those elections, anything potentially is up for grabs. And that's usually sometimes we see these things right before us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're lucky, we're fortunate that this amendment is on the ballot. Our legislators worked hard to make sure this amendment would be on the ballot in a year where we're going to see a lot of turnout. But quite frankly, there's also, we're unfortunately seeing a lot of apathy when it comes to this election. Folks just are not as engaged or invigorated maybe to vote for some of the candidates that they're going to see on the ballot. Now I've got to put my League hat on and say, you're not only voting for the president when you go to the ballot box, but there are potentially local election races on your ballot. You'll be voting on statewide races. So there are a number of different races that, you should vote on and that your voice should be heard within. But we're also encouraging folks to, if you're not maybe invigorated to vote for a particular candidate this year, turn out for your rights, right? Turn out to protect your freedoms here in New York State and turn out to vote on the New York Equal Rights Amendment.
Talking with Erica Smitka from the League of Women Voters of New York State, and she's been sharing with us throughout the course of this interview here on the Social Justice Forum. And Erica, when we look at women voters across New York State, what can you tell us about turnout, and what can you tell us about their work?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think women can be lumped in with the rest of New York when it comes to turnout. And the fact of the matter is, New York State typically has a fairly low voter turnout, right? And that's due to a number of varying factors. But the League has been working hard and, will continue to work hard to make sure that folks are registered to vote. They know what they're going to be voting on, and that they turn out and know that their vote matters and their voice matters. And so, we're still advocating to, obviously push women across the state, but we want to make sure we see all voters turn out. And that includes young voters. We have a huge sect of voters that are going to be newly eligible to vote in this upcoming election. And we've got to make sure that those folks turn out and that, again, their voice is heard at the ballot box this year.
Only have a couple of minutes left, but before we do go, I want to give the chance, the opportunity to push in a little bit here because you did talk about factors, right? Factors that are concerning why potentially women don't come out and vote. Can you give us a little bit?
Yeah, there's a lot of different factors, and I'll speak personally here, but I think some of it is thinking about New York as a fairly progressive state, and perhaps this illusion that when you get to the ballot box, your voice doesn't have as big of an impact or doesn't matter as much, and that's simply not true. Especially when it comes to a ballot measure like the Equal Rights Amendment, every single vote counts. And historically, in New York State, in many states across the country, we've seen so many races won and lost simply by tens of votes, or in some cases even 1 or 2 votes. So I just kind of re-emphasize to folks, re-emphasize to men, women, people in general, and young folks that every single vote counts, and every single vote really is important.
Yeah. And for people who want to get more information, what do they do, and where do they go?
The best place to go is either to the State Board of Elections website, or the League has a great resource called vote411.org. It's your one-stop shop for all your election needs. You can find out where to vote, how to register to vote, what's going to be on your ballot, and make sure you know exactly where you're going and exactly who you're voting for.
And you got to make sure to support the ERA. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Erica Smitka, thank you so much for being with me.
Great. Thank you for having me.
All righty. Thank you. We are taking a quick break, but guess what? We got more show coming up right after this.